May 18th, 1291, the endgame of a conflict that has raged for 200 years. A massive assault chips away at the walls of a stronghold and the psyches of its defenders. At a fortress in the Middle East, desperate holdouts endure the final attack of a medieval war of the worlds.
So the idea of the Crusades, the symbolism of the Crusades, became the clash of civilizations.
At a place called Acre, a dream of holy conquest is shattered forever. "700 years later, archaeologists pick up the pieces of a moment in time that changed the world.
Here we can really feel the last day of St. John Church. We find some remains of the stained glass that fell down and crashed into the floor.
The fall of Acre in 1291 was a key event because it marked the end, effectively, the end of the story of the Crusades in the Holy Land.
At last, from beneath the Holy Land, new evidence reveals how warriors on both sides of the Crusades really lived, fought, and died. For over 2 centuries, Christian and Muslim armies are locked in a deadly embrace. From 1096 to 1291 AD, the lands of today's Mideast change hands in a series of 8 crusades. Before the sides part, tens of thousands die in a glut of battles and massacres. In the late 11th century, Muslim sultans rule most of North Africa, Spain, and the eastern shores of the Mediterranean. The Christian world is split in 2. In Europe, a collection of small states and kingdoms. To the east, the Byzantine Empire is controlled from its capital in Constantinople.
The Crusades give us a model, they give us a template of the clash of religions and the clash of civilizations and the clash of continents.
In the Mideast, Acre is a lively Muslim city in what is today the north coast of Israel.
There's no denying that it was a major port and a major commercial center. Both commercial and military. Those are the 2 points. You can't just look at it in a military sense.
Acre is also the gateway to the Western world's most sacred piece of real estate. It is called the Holy Land. Its holy core, Jerusalem, a city sacred to Muslims, Christians, and Jews. For some, the dark history of the Crusades evokes the violence that plagues the Mideast today.
Many Muslims, particularly in the Middle East, see the creation and the manner of the creation of Israel as an extension of the Crusades themselves. That is, the arrival and the presence of Westerners.
1,000 years ago, a war between 2 worlds transformed this center of faith into an unholy battlefield. Today, archaeologists probe the moment in time where a cycle of intolerance and violence began. Some explore elements crucial to moving great armies across continents.
Horses are the most important logistic animal of the Middle Ages. But we don't know anything about the Crusader horse, about heights, about breeds, about species, about anything.
You say it was about? I'd say it was about 3 pounds there.
3 pounds.
In England, the role of military technology is evaluated through innovative research.
The idea that the Western Europeans came in with some kind of superior military technology, and that's why the First Crusade was able to win, I think is complete baloney.
And how much baloney have we been fed on the leaders of the Crusades? Historians piece together the personality clash between Richard the Lionheart and the Muslim hero Saladin.
Saladin is a magnificent figure because of the generosity of his character and the generosity of his spirit.
Richard arrives as a brawling, drunken football hooligan, and by the end of his tour to the Middle East, he's a changed man.
What forces drove these men? What motives sparked and fueled 2 centuries of war? Flashback to the year 1095. The Christian world hits rough times. Islamic armies overrun the eastern end of the Byzantine Empire. Meanwhile, in Europe, power struggles between rival knights wreak havoc on the region. Filling the power vacuum is the church, now more centralized and politically influential. Its leader, Pope Urban II, seizes a moment in time that rocks the world.
Here was this Pope Urban II who looked across Europe and saw all this bloodshed going on between these knights, and they had all this warrior energy, and they were just fighting one another all the time. And in a kind of inspiration, he declared that he should harness all of this energy towards a noble quest.
Pope Urban declares the Holy Land is occupied by worshippers of the devil. He orders his flock to liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims. August 1096. The first Crusaders prepare to hit the road.
The First Crusade is kind of a hodgepodge. It's not a fancy military enterprise. A lot of people and a lot of common people become involved. It's a great popular movement.
From across Europe, tens of thousands join the quest, including hordes of peasants, all a bit fuzzy on the mission at hand.
Those who set off had a rather hazy notion, most of them, of what they were doing.
The Crusaders did cause havoc. How were they to live? How were they to sustain themselves? It was almost like Sherman's march through the South. I mean, they had to live off the land, so they were not welcomed as they moved along.
As they head east, the peasant mob spins out of control. Along the Rhineland, thousands of Jews are massacred, and 4,000 Hungarians are murdered in one town alone. Before they leave Eastern Europe, most of the peasants die of disease or turn back. When news of the Christian hordes breaks in Jerusalem, the Muslims are underwhelmed.
The great majority of people in the Islamic world, they simply regarded Western Europeans as a load of ignorant thugs, as useless for anything, really. So much so that they had virtually no interest in them.
Christian military forces depart Europe in 1096. After a 3-year march, they push into the Holy Land. May 1099. The first elements of the Crusader armies reach the gates of Jerusalem. Inside the city walls, the Muslim defenders consider their options.
The Muslims are inside preparing for war. They're looking out, they're seeing that all of these foreign troops are coming in to conquer their city. So what do? They boil oil, they sharpen their spears, they count their weapons.
But in this war of the worlds, which side has the edge? At a castle in the English countryside, historian David Nicole intends to find out.
The nitty-gritty of everyday life is, to me, absolutely fascinating, and I would love to have been there. I was virtually brought up surrounded by arms and armor and books about arms and armor because my father had had an interest in this since his childhood.
A specialist in medieval arms and armor, Dr. Nicole has written a series of books on the hardware and training of Christian and Muslim armies. Using reconstructed arms, Nicole and his team attempt to confirm accounts of Muslim fighting styles. Weapons expert Stephen Rafes suits up in traditional garb to keep the simulations as accurate as possible.
There are certain military exercises which we know of from the Islamic world. The most famous is training a man to charge with his sword, cutting at a sequence of reeds, reducing the target until he's got down almost to ground level. Now, that takes incredible skill, not only in the use of the weapon, but in riding skills.
Always wanted to see that being done.
But what if your targets are decked out in Crusader armor? The researchers prove that in this case, even a complete dummy has a chance.
Surprisingly little impact was done. We have the sword, he had 3 good shots. The first one across the shield did absolutely nothing whatsoever. Now, the second shot, more effective, he got past the shield, you could say, hit the mail. But the mail, again, is padded by the gambeson underneath, and it was virtually no effect. And the third shot, again very dramatic, hit him across the face. But with this kind of helmet, it might have given the guy a bit of a headache, but again, it was not a really effective blow.
But when it comes to Christians in hard hats, Muslim warriors are no dummies. Here, the perfect choice is a medieval can opener called the mace.
That was very, very much more effective. We had 3 good blows there. The first one, as you can see, clearly smashed through this mail entirely. And then we come to the blows on the helmet. Now, that is a big surprise to me. I really didn't expect it to be that effective. It looks like a bullet hole. Right the way through. Quite extraordinary. One of these spikes made an absolutely direct blow. Penetrated right the way through.
The verdict? The Crusaders have their work cut out for them.
The differences between the Muslim world and the European world were not really differences in basic technology. They were differences in degree of sophistication, how advanced they were. And this is a field where I feel quite sure that the Muslims were clearly in advance.
In June 1099, the Crusaders surrounding Jerusalem chill out. They may be fanatics, but they're no dummies either.
The Crusaders spend from June 6th to July 14th building and understanding how to attack the city. They send their architects around, trying to understand the weaknesses of the city itself.
The city's perimeters are impressive. Jerusalem is surrounded by fortified walls. But the Crusader engineers find a weak spot, not in the walls, but in Jerusalem's topography.
This is actually the spot where the Crusaders breached the walls of the old city. It was the spot that throughout history has been used because this is the flattest area in Jerusalem. In the northern part of the city right here, that's where Jerusalem can only be defeated.
July 7th, 1099, the battle for Jerusalem begins. Jerusalem falls to the Crusaders on the 8th day of the campaign.
The Jewish and Muslim defenders of Jerusalem are overwhelmed by Christian fanatics. The Crusaders turn their siege into a massacre.
One Crusader sums up the moment.
If you had been there, you would have seen our feet colored to our ankles with the blood of the slain. None of them were left alive. Neither women nor children were spared.
Historians estimate that between 10 to 20,000 of the city's Muslims are killed. The Crusaders also burn a synagogue, killing many of Jerusalem's Jews who fled there for sanctuary.
Jerusalem is so associated with the massacre of Muslims and Jews in that military triumph that it is tainted in history.
It was seen as barbaric, uncalled for, and it created a great demand for revenge and retaliatory action.
In the years following Jerusalem's fall, the Christians erect 45 churches, many built on the ruins of mosques and synagogues they have desecrated. But while the Crusaders build churches to save their souls, they also build fortresses to save their necks. The Holy Land, 1160 AD. 60 years after the siege of Jerusalem, the Crusaders have established 4 states in the Holy Land, protected by 60 strongholds of stone.
Now, these castles are very strong, much bigger in many cases than the castles from the same period within Western Europe.
A Crusader fortress, like Belvoir Castle, is designed as a self-contained mothership, built to survive the alien Muslim universe.
Fortresses were built so that they could suspend and create for themselves total independence, even without assistance from the outside as they were being invaded.
The Crusaders are low on manpower, so the forts are built with thick walls. How thick? Try 15 feet of stone blocks.
This is a very typical gate from the Crusader period. A fortress that would be built with tremendously wide walls. For instance, this gate has a 5-yard width, which is tremendously powerful.
Fitted with huge stone hinges, the castle doors close towards the outside and are locked with huge bolts to fend off enemy battering rams.
Next to us are the holes in which the bolt would be placed.
Crusader forts bristle with state-of-the-art defensive positions. Carved into the walls are openings called loopholes.
You've got arrow slits. You've got loopholes. These are areas where the archers could actually sit. You've got areas where they would be able to drop down boiling oil, feces, all kinds of things, all within these sections. You've got trapdoors, secret areas, exits into cisterns. You've got all kinds of networks underneath the ground.
Finally, the biggest 3 secrets of a Crusader fort's defense: location, location, and location.
What they did is they put them very high up in the air so that they could see in all directions. This one, Belvoir, is 600 yards above the ground. So you've got a tremendous view. You can literally see 50 miles from one side to the other. As far up as the Golan Heights, you could see all the way on the other side of us, well into Jordan.
Despite their lofty vantage point, the Crusaders are blind to the threat that looms on the horizon. After Jerusalem falls to the Crusaders in 1099, a new leader unites the Muslim world 80 years later. His name, Saladin. While Crusaders barely control the Holy Land, Saladin unifies what today are the nations of Egypt, Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and northern Iraq.
There is no modern political leader you can compare to Saladin.
A 41-year-old sultan from what is now Iraq, Saladin is a piece of work.
Here you have a man who was a convinced, pious Muslim, but he was also a realistic ruler. He was not a naive innocent. He was not a saint. By and large, there's no denying that Saladin he's a hero.
Saladin's secretary describes his leader.
Whenever the Sultan shook hands with someone, he would not let go of his hand until that person had taken the initiative to do so. He was a paragon of chivalry, generous, extremely modest, and had a welcoming face.
But how comfortable was Saladin on the battlefield? Was he merciful or ruthless?
He was not a saint, or indeed he could show considerable ruthlessness.
Crusaders are hard at work, building a castle at a strategic site called Vadim Yaakov. Saladin attacks before the Europeans can finish the job.
We know that Saladin broke into the castle, and there were about 1,500 men there.
Israeli archaeologist Dr. Ronnie Ellenblum has excavated this site for the past 10 years. As they uncovered the cistern at the fort, Ellenblum and his team made a grisly find. A heap of human bones confirms that hundreds of Crusaders were slaughtered.
This is a bone of a knight or soldier who protected the castle of Vadim Yaakov. He got 3 blows. This one, which did not cut all his shoulder because he was protected by a chain armor. Another blow amputated his hand, and the third one cut his jaw. Each blow is enough to kill a person. People are in a blood frenzy, killing and cutting again and again. People are already finished. He killed about 700 or 800 people.
From the evidence, Dr. Ellenblum has concluded that Vadim Yaakov was more than a battle.
I think it's the first time we succeeded to find the remains of a massacre.
Not all the bones found in the mass grave are human. Some belong to horses. Experts believe Saladin slaughtered them deliberately.
It is a way to disgrace the Crusader soldiers. So far, we have found about 10 equids, 10 horses, and 5 complete skeletons dumped together in one big heap.
The bones in the burial pit present a heap of questions as well.
Maybe try to do as many measurements as possible for one teeth, and then we can compare it.
Dr. Rivka Rabinowitz expected to find remains of mighty Crusader steeds. But she got a surprise, straight from the horse's mouth.
We thought we'll find big horses, as the historical record said, but maybe we have a small horse or a big mule.
Is it possible some of the Crusaders' legendary mounts were only mules?
We are not able completely to see the exact differences between the two species. So I think our next stage will be using the DNA analysis.
For now, the skulls prove only one thing for sure. Saladin's victory at Vadim Yaakov cuts the Christians down to size. After the battle, a series of peace treaties between Crusaders and Muslims are signed and broken. When Crusaders attack Muslim pilgrims to Mecca, Saladin evokes an Islamic practice almost forgotten until then. He declares a jihad.
Jihad is a declaration of holy war, and it's a holy war for defensive purposes. Saladin declares a holy war, and that's what unites the Muslims.
What the Crusades succeeded in doing was reviving this aspect of jihad.
20,000 Crusaders learned this the hard way in 1187. When they confront the Muslim forces at a place called Hattin, death rains from the sky.
The trap which Saladin sprung on the Crusaders was brilliant. The Crusader fighters were coming from this direction, making their way down below to the fresh water badly needed in the Sea of Tiberias. When they got to this point, the trap was sprung. Saladin sent out thousands of archers from this cliff face and shot arrows down at the Crusader army.
Historians believe the mobility and accuracy of Saladin's archers were unparalleled. Today, at Hedingham Castle, David Nicole investigates those claims with the help of expert archer Stephen Race. Nicole's research shows it's not the size of your bow that counts, it's how you use it.
There are certain military exercises using the bow on horseback at different targets. Long range, short range, standing still, moving horse, shooting at a target which is ahead of you, a target which is behind you.
The Crusaders used 3 fingers to shoot their arrows. The Muslims launched them with 1 thumb only.
The string is drawn back, and I'll do a dry loose here.
Some historians have suggested that the thumb draw was more powerful than the finger draw. And some of the original sources, Arabic and Turkish written sources, seem to indicate this of the bow.
Yeah, it's
That's
here.
the working part stiff.
To confirm the thumb draw's superiority, Nicole sets up a speed trap to find out.
This machine ought to tell us how fast the arrows fly as they go between those antennae, and it registers in feet per second.
First, the traditional 3-finger pull. Top speed, 116 miles per hour. Next up, the thumb draw.
definite point there, do you see?
Yes, I do.
And then when I loose, it's a much cleaner release than the 3-finger release on a string.
107. 110. So generally speaking, they are rather slower. Not a great deal, but which is contrary to what I expected.
But I don't think you necessarily get a more powerful release. I think a lot of it's propaganda. You say you have a better weapon.
Yes.
You scare your enemy. Well, what were
the others? Were
But the thumb release of Saladin's forces did provide a key advantage.
So this is actually, so the thumb release is actually probably more efficient.
Which would mean consistent range.
Yeah. More accuracy.
Even if Muslim archers were accurate, how could normal arrows possibly take out knights dressed in chainmail? Saladin's marksmen rode horses. At close range, the arrows of mobile archers had greater impact. Not only is this target a dummy, he's also plastered. A good idea, considering what's next.
Now this is very interesting. 2 clean penetrations, 1 rebound, and 1 which is not really a penetration. But there's a point here which I think really is rather interesting, rather horrific actually, that the arrow that rebounded broke the links of the male, and 1 link has actually been driven away from the male, through the cloth, and into the plaster. And this, of course, is a plaster dummy, not a human being. If this had been a human being, that broken piece of metal, that half ring, would have been pushed right inside the unfortunate person.
At the Battle of Hattin, Muslim archers give Saladin the fatal edge. The entire Crusader force is either taken prisoner or killed. More traumatic still is the capture of the holiest relic in Christianity by Saladin's forces. What Crusaders believe are pieces of the true cross on which Jesus Christ died.
When there would be a great military battle, the Crusaders stupidly would take out this great relic, thinking that they would have divine providence. And it was interesting the way in which it was used as a bargaining chip, because it was of no value to the Muslim side and of great religious value to the Christian side.
A defeated knight sums up the Crusaders' despair.
Lord God, our war is over. We are nothing but dead men, and the kingdom has come to an end.
Hattin is important because this is where Salahuddin establishes himself as a military genius. It is Hattin and the fall of Hattin that really opens up and turns round the Crusades.
After Saladin's decisive victory at Hattin, he takes back the port city of Acre. 3 months later, in 1188, the Muslims win the ultimate prize, Jerusalem. When the news reaches Europe that Jerusalem and the True Cross are lost, it was reported the Pope was so shocked, he dropped dead. Saladin enters Jerusalem in triumph, but not in fury. He takes control of the holiest Christian shrine in Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Instead of destroying the church, Saladin opens its doors to Christian pilgrims, many of them members of competing religious groups. So to prevent one Christian faction from shutting out the other, Saladin places the keys of the church in the hands of 2 Muslim families. Incredibly, their descendants remain the gatekeepers of the church to this day.
Saladin's generosity fails to impress the European powers. A new crusade is declared with a brand new leader. This time, Saladin meets his match. June 7th, 1191. A 34-year-old English king sets foot in the Holy Land at the port city of Acre.
Richard the Lionheart was a war lover. He was the greatest warrior of his time, a great athlete.
Richard the Lionheart, the brave English king turned crusader, right? not exactly. Sure, the guy's a king of England, but he's only spent 6 months of his entire life there. And guess what? He only speaks French, not English.
But then, as now, money is the universal language. In a new twist on siege tactics, Richard promises his men gold for each stone they can remove from the walls of Acre nearby. It's worth every penny. Winning Acre will give Richard a beachhead in the Holy Land. But to retake the port, he'll have to breach defenses the Crusaders built when they ruled the city. June 11th, 1191. Pulling Acre apart brick by brick could take a while. To conquer the fort, Richard's army needs a shortcut. Their solution? Portable attack platforms called siege towers. Rolled up to the enemy wall, Richard's men climb stairways to the top of Acre's walls. Saladin's secretary describes the psychological impact.
It overtopped the city wall. The city garrison were greatly fearful of it and were tempted to ask for terms.
July 12th, 1191. Just over a month after Richard's arrival, the city of Acre falls to the Crusaders. It was written that Saladin looked like a mother who had lost a child. Meanwhile, Richard grows impatient when Saladin is slow to negotiate the terms of surrender. The English king orders Muslim prisoners led out of the city. One by one, they are slaughtered. 2,700 men in all.
And this is a great stain on Richard's reputation historically, and undercuts the kind of mythologizing and romanticizing of Richard in European lore.
As epic as the Battle of Acre is the struggle to uncover the site today. Since the Crusades ended, 2 Muslim cities were built over the original 13th century site. Over the past 12 years, hundreds of tons of debris have been removed. Emerging from the rubble, the majestic halls that once sheltered European occupiers.
This is the main complex of the Hospitaller. Here in this complex is a hospice that's going to take care of the pilgrim.
Uncovering Acre has been the archaeological quest of Eliezer Stern. The excavations support written accounts that during the Crusades, Muslim practices are rubbing off on the Europeans. A case in point is the treatment of the sick.
Before the Crusades, European hospitals were created exclusively to feed and house the poor, not to heal them. Often the sick were actually turned away. That's about to change.
This excavated chamber is the site of a Crusader hospital and an order of knights called the Hospitallers. In essence, Hospitaller knights are warrior monks. But off the battlefield, their day gig is to care for ailing pilgrims and Crusaders. In Muslim hospitals, doctors enhance the recovery of their patients with diets of fruit and fresh foods. Could the Crusaders at Acre be following their lead? Scientists will find out from a source the rest of us would rather leave behind. No matter how pious, how civilized, or how cunning we are, pit stops are a timeless and universal reality. Ancient latrines from the Crusader hospital are discovered at Acre. The toilets drain into the bowels of the fort, and with luck, they may reveal what was inside the bowels of the Crusaders. Samples of Crusader night soil are shipped to a specialist in England. At Charing Cross Hospital in London, what is crap to the Crusaders is pay dirt for Dr. Piers Mitchell.
So we set up a project where we could look at what people were eating, which gives us the ability to look for evidence of medical treatment.
Separated by a centrifuge and heat, the raw material has a high yuck factor, but the results are no laughing matter. Forget being wounded in battle. The Crusaders' guts are under constant siege by parasites. Hailing from the Mideast is the whitworm and the roundworm. But Mitchell also discovers this intestinal mascot.
Now, the fish tapeworm eggs that we found are particularly interesting because they haven't been found in the Middle East prior to the time of the Crusades. So this shows that they must have come across with the Crusaders using those latrines.
But along with signs of disease, there is evidence of therapeutic diets.
Something dramatic has happened in the way people are being treated. They were encouraged to have salad leaves and a wide range of fruits, especially figs, apples, pears, pomegranates, and so on.
Mitchell's analysis of feces revealed the Crusaders were not eating their usual fare, a diet rich in beans. Instead, the Crusaders consume wholesome bread and fresh fruits, the same types of foods that Muslim doctors gave their patients.
The Crusades were one of the pivotal reasons as to why we started treating patients in European hospitals with medical treatment.
After a century of bloodshed, Richard takes a crack at shuttle diplomacy. At a military stalemate with Saladin, he sends an offer to his enemy.
Come here and listen well to my words. The country is utterly ruined, and goods and lives have been sacrificed on both sides. The time has come to stop this.
Richard express mails a wish list to Saladin. At the top is Jerusalem and the true cross. Saladin's reply is swift and sharp.
The city is as holy to us as it is to you. It is therefore out of the question for us to abandon it. As for the cross, it is a great trump in our hands, and we will surrender it only in return for some important concession.
According to legend, the only concession Richard has to offer is his own flesh and blood.
I propose that my sister, Queen Joanna, marry Melek el-Adel, Saladin's brother. Once married, the couple would become the joint rulers of the new kingdom of Jerusalem, with their royal seat in Jerusalem.
Richard may be king, but his sister is nobody's pawn. The deal is off. But here's the good news. Both sides are talking instead of killing.
There's an interesting relationship that develops between Richard and Salahuddin over the years that Richard is in the Middle East. Correspondence, exchanges of gifts, exchange of fruit, even exchanges of doctors when Richard falls ill. And this shows the kind of respect that both develop for each other.
When Richard falls sick with fever, Saladin's personal physician makes a house call with a rare desert cocktail. Fruit juice cooled with snow from a distant mountain. From history's two most unlikely pen pals springs the hope for peace.
When we arrive at an understanding, we will meet and friendship will prevail between us.
Richard and Saladin never do meet in person. Yet on September 2nd, 1192, these two great warriors make peace. The bottom line, Acre stays a Christian stronghold. Jerusalem remains in Muslim hands, but Saladin guarantees safe passage for pilgrims of all faiths to the holy city. And what about the true cross that Saladin refused to give up? Along with the Holy Grail and the lost Ark, it too is lost in the folds of time. After spending only a year and a half in the Holy Land, Richard departs for Europe empty-handed.
Richard the Lionheart spent 5 years, mobilized all of Europe, bankrupted England to come to capture Jerusalem and the Holy Sepulchre, got to the gates of Jerusalem and decided to give it all up. But I don't think he thought of himself as a failure.
Religious access to Jerusalem, forged by Richard and Saladin, outlives them both. But the winds of war will stir again, 100 years after their deaths. Once again, the curse of the Crusades falls on the port of Acre. Summer 1290. A century after Saladin and Richard make peace, the port of Acre remains the last major Christian foothold in the Holy Land. Here, Europeans trade goods and ideas freely with the Muslims.
And I really think that this was part of the interaction that was taking place. So with the clash of civilizations, there was also an interaction, a dialogue of civilizations that was taking place, which is very interesting.
But the dialogue soon breaks down as Muslim and Christian leaders renew their power struggle. The kings of Europe scrape together a motley force to support the Crusaders at Acre. 12,000 so-called Crusaders, mostly Italians, arrive in the summer of 1290. They're supposed to help preserve the peace. Instead, they end it. A German pilgrim remembers the troops' brutal entrance.
They did no good, but abode by day and by night in taverns, and did much evil.
At the end of August, the peace of Acre is shattered. The Crusader rabble go on a rampage. Anyone wearing a beard is considered a Muslim and killed on sight. News of the massacre soon reaches the new rulers of the Holy Land, Muslim warriors known as Mamluks.
A Mamluk is a man who is of slave origin, purchased as a child or as an adolescent, and then is trained to a very, very high degree as a professional soldier, but he's also made literate. He's educated. He's not just a thug soldier. And when he's fully trained, he is released.
A Mamluk army masses outside Acre's walls. Ultimately, some 200,000 warriors seal off the city. The Mamluk strategy is described in this account.
He pitched his tents, set up 60 machines, and without any respite, assailed the city with fire, stones, and arrows.
Today, Acre's streets hold evidence of that final and deadly assault.
These ballista are ancient cannonballs. The Mamluks catapulted these things into the fortress itself, and they're found all over the place here.
Muslim catapults chip away at the fortress walls and make a major dent in the Crusaders' psyches.
It's mostly the psychological impact of these things crashing in on a regular basis. It's a form of artillery bombardment. Where do you hide? There's nowhere to go. This thing could drop on your head any minute.
Some Hospitaller Knights take refuge in a chapel of Acre's St. John's Church. But the only answer to their prayers is a hardball message from the enemy. Archaeologists believe they have now found the floor of the chapel of St. John's Church. Eleazar Stern assumes the archaeological position. He'd like to know how the chapel was destroyed and what his Hospitallers saw in their last hours.
It's layer after layers of this broken glass. This is another color, maybe brown or red glass.
Along with bits of glass is a clue to how the church was finally destroyed.
Oh, this is amazing. Look, this is part of charcoal. Now I understand why the environment of the glass is much darker than the floor. This is maybe the wooden frame of the windows, and it's burnt completely. And now we have the evidence that the church was destroyed by fire.
There is a saying in the Mideast, do not consider any act of kindness insignificant. But kindness in the final days of Acre takes a backseat to rank. Although the fort is surrounded by hostile forces, ancient accounts report some groups of Christians make a getaway. But how? Archaeologists discover the answer 7 centuries later, a subterranean escape route for members only. Crusader knights take the tube out of Acre. This extraordinary tunnel was discovered after months of exhausting excavations. It runs for over 1,000 feet from the fort to the edge of the Mediterranean.
The tunnel connected the Templar castle in the west to the harbor in the east.
The tunnel was built by an elite group called the Knights Templar. They're sworn to protect pilgrims, but apparently there's nothing in their contract about sharing their exit strategy.
This is a private tunnel. No one knew except the Templars that there is such a tunnel. In the last day of Acre, the Templar Knights managed to escape through this tunnel to the harbor and then run away to Europe.
Experts believe the flight of the Templars is a clue to why the Christians lost the last great battle of the Crusades. According to one account,
they would not have lost the city had they but helped one another faithfully. But when they were fighting without the city, one party would run away and leave the other to be slain.
Female pilgrims, many from wealthy families in Europe, grow desperate.
500 most noble ladies came down to the seashore, carrying with them all their jewels and ornaments of gold and precious stones, and cried aloud whether there were any soldiers who would take all their jewels. If only he would take them, even naked, to some safe land.
A Mamluk warrior savors the Crusaders' defeat.
The lands of the coast were fully returned to the Muslims, a result undreamed of. Thus were the foreigners expelled from all of Syria and the coastal zones. God grant that they never set foot there again.
Never again are the Holy Lands occupied by the Crusaders.
The fall of Acre in 1291 was a key event. It was the end of the story. It was the last major enclave to fall.
In the end, Muslim culture is unaffected by the ways of the Europeans.
The impact on the Muslim world was minimum because here was a civilization already at a peak. And what they brought, the Europeans and the Crusaders brought to the Middle East, was simply ideas of war and warriors and sometimes brutal savagery.
Their dream in ruins, the Crusaders leave the Holy Land. But long before the Crusades, Mideastern ideas take root on the European continent.
What was positive for Europe was the idea of civilization, which means chivalry, which means learning, which means books, which means a way of life, which means cleanliness in personal hygiene and personal diet.
Scholars are stimulated by exposure to more advanced mathematics and astronomy. Italian trade ports make a killing ferrying pilgrims to the Holy Land. The new wealth stimulates the Renaissance. Over 700 years ago, Saladin and Richard began a dialogue that led to a time of tolerance in the Holy Land. Today, in the Middle East, there remain many on both sides who see that distant truce as a pilgrimage worth taking again.
In the same streets where Muslim and Jew were cut down by Crusaders, they now hope for peace and an end at last to an unholy war.